Hello class, summer term 2015. Sorry about class today. A comedy of errors, which were all my fault, occurred. And so I have decided to post this video with a follow-on part 2 to keep us current and make sure you have all the information in preparation of next week's exam. So I'm just going to cover a little bit about fiber today and make sure you know the difference between fiber and glycogen and how important they are. So where we left off was with this slide, which is in your textbook. We talked about how starch is like all of the students, each glucose molecule holding hands at the front of the classroom, student holding hand, and so on. And what will happen is that they branch like this or they coil like this. If you eat starch from fruits and vegetables, whole grain, bread, rice, cereal, pasta, you get this starch. If you provide this starch to your body in a slow, gradual, sustained way, your intestinal tract will break down that starch and put glucose into the bloodstream. In the case of fructose and galactose rather, fructose and galactose go to the liver for conversion into glucose. Nonetheless, glucose is in your bloodstream. Well, if you have exercised, if you have low blood sugar, your body will take this glucose from the liver and make glycogen. Glycogen, the reason this is in yellow, it's very different from starch. Glycogen only exists in the human and animal body. When carbohydrate, glucose, is provided slowly, the body will remake it into what almost looks like the same structure, this branch chain structure known as glycogen. It's a complex carbohydrate storage form for the human and the animal. Very different from fiber. We talked about that briefly. Fiber is still chains of glucose, only they're held together in tightly compacted rows. And what's different between fiber and starch is that in fiber, we can't break the bonds between these tightly compacted rows. To visualize that, imagine a cow in a field eating grass, which is what cows were put on this planet supposed to eat. And they eat this grass, which is full of fiber, of course, these tightly compacted rows. In order to digest these tightly compacted rows, a cow spits up his cud into his third stomach. So all of that rumen in the third stomach then breaks down this fiber, so the cow can actually utilize fiber for energy. Thankfully, we do not have a third stomach, so we cannot break down this fiber, and we can't use it for energy. So basically, it goes into our guts, and it hits our intestine, and our intestine says, whoa, I can't digest this stuff. It pulls water from your tissues into these strands of fiber, and it bulks it up, the bulking effect of fiber, which is good because that will exercise your gut and clean it out. Well, fiber, very different from glycogen, different from starch. So, let's look at the group as a whole. Are carbohydrates bad? No. If people want to lose weight, they need energy. They need energy to exercise. They need energy to maintain health. So about half of our calories should come from carbohydrate. That doesn't mean we go out and sustain ourselves on rice, cereal, and pasta, white. We should eat plenty of fruits and vegetables and whole grains. In review, this is what we talked about with starch. It's units of glucose all put together from plants. Plants do this so that they have the energy in the seed to sprout. Remember, my fava beans had all the energy it needed in the seed so that it could sprout. We can get that glucose not just from sweets, but if we get them from whole foods like grains, legumes, and seeds, we get the most nutritious benefit. So, How does this all happen? By way of review, we've talked about this in chapter 3. Salivary amylase in the mouth. Salivary amylase, and in ASE begins digestion of starch. Not much happens in the stomach, but at the top of the small intestine, the pancreas secretes enzymatic juices that begin the digestion of carbohydrate. Also at the top of the small intestine, remember, bicarbonate is going to neutralize the acid content. So that serves a very useful purpose for us. Then in the small intestine itself, there are enzymes that break down carbohydrate. So I had asked you to memorize glucose, fructose, and galactose, the monosaccharides. Then the disaccharides are maltose, which is 2 glucoses, sucrose, which is glucose and fructose, and lactose, which is galactose and glucose. Each of them has their own enzyme which ends in ASE. So maltose, maltase, sucrose, sucrase, lactose, lactase are the enzymes. Amylase is the enzyme for starch. Here's glycogen on the other hand. Again, it looks a lot like starch, but it is different. It lives in the liver and muscle of humans and animals. This is a cross-section of a human liver. There's a lobe of the liver. And what you see with these black dots is units of glucose. Molecules of glucoses intermeshed in this web called glycogen. Another visual of it shows dark dots held together in a mesh. Available glucose. Each dark dot is available glucose for the cell's energy. Now, what's interesting about animal liver and muscle is that immediately upon slaughter, that glycogen is broken down into glucose. So you can't just consume a piece of animal flesh and get their glycogen, because on slaughter it's immediately released. So it is important, though, as you can surmise from our discussion thus far, it's an immediately available storage form for energy. It makes it out of starch, especially when you provide your body that slow, gradual, steady, sustained supply of glucose. You store glycogen in your muscles. Along with each pound goes 3 to 4 pounds of water. So one of the first things you'll see on a person who tries a low carbohydrate, high protein diet is that they will lose about 5 pounds. Well, there is a difference between muscle and liver glycogen. Muscle glycogen is sort of selfish. As muscles become more fit, you tell that quadricep, I'm going to exercise you. That quadricep says, well, I need immediately available energy for myself, my quadricep. I'm going to improve glycogen stores. So that's the good news about exercise, is that as you become more fit, your body's ability to store glycogen improves. Muscles use glycogen in that muscle. The liver is different. The liver looks out for the whole body, as we've learned. The liver is the command central for most nutrition. The liver is going to take glycogen and hold on to it to sustain life. Remember, you have to have a steady supply of glucose going to your brain to stay alive. Well, the liver takes care of that by managing the breakdown of glycogen into the bloodstream. So, let's change gears and talk about fiber. I'm going to tell you a story about when I was in college and fortunate enough to be an undergrad at San Diego State when they still let undergrads do research. It was probably pretty expensive, and I'm not sure if they still do it today, but let me tell you, it was quite an experience. And this will help illustrate the difference between insoluble and soluble fibers. Insoluble fiber is the stiff stuff in plants. The insoluble fiber is what makes this stalk of celery stiff. It stands up like a tree, like a stalk of broccoli or a stalk of grass. This stiff stuff is insoluble, meaning it does not hang out with water. It would be like, us having a third stomach to digest that fiber. We simply don't. So it moves through the body pulling water with it, bulking up and moving through without being digested. Now, the soluble fiber is a different story. It hangs out with water, and water binds those molecules of glucose, and bacteria go to work on the water-soluble fiber, and they cause side effects like gas. They're partially digested, but the bacteria don't get very far. So let me show you what that looks like. There's the soluble fiber. That's also going to contain some, or insoluble and soluble. This would be an example of insoluble fiber. See how these are tightly compacted rows of glucose held together in strands? Tightly compacted rows, you know that's fiber. So this is what insoluble fiber would look like. Each one of these little shapes is a 6 carbon ring of glucose. So you see glucose held together, and what's key is these bonds between the molecules of glucose. So you have strand after strand after strand tightly compacted together, meaning that's insoluble. The human gut cannot go to work on that. It moves through. This is the same thing. It shows you do not have to know the chemistry. The chemistry is pretty specific on how these work, but the different chemical bonds here, the human body cannot digest. Water-soluble fiber is different. I know this looks like starch, but don't be mistaken. This is actually fiber that is held by different kinds of chemical bonds. The thing that makes this fiber unique is those OHs hanging off the ends. The OH. That is going to want to hang out with water, H2O. So what you see here is water getting in these bonds and trying to break it up. Now, the enzymes in humans are not sufficient, so they only partially break it up. And it's the bacteria that actually go to work, not enzymes. And the bacteria do have some success breaking these down. But that's why water-soluble fibers cause the side effect of gas, bloating, diarrhea, because the bacteria have gone to work on them. So again, let me tell you a story about the difference between soluble and insoluble. Back in the Middle Ages, the mid-80s, when I was in college, there was a lot of research. It was real kind of trendy to be consuming water-soluble fiber oat bran. Oat bran contains pectin, which hangs out with water. Pectin is in the white citrus albedo, the white pith of an orange. If you peel an orange, that white part contains pectin. It's the stuff that makes jellies solid. Well, pectin gums mucilage polysaccharides, kind of like, I think of it as mucus, mucilage polysaccharides. It's the slippery, slimy, gelatinous stuff in food. You see it on the top of oatmeal. You stir a pot of beans, they become pasty. So my research assistant, my lab partner in college, and I decided we were not going to just look at pectin, which was in oat bran and very trendy at the time. We were going to start a new route of research. We decided we were going to research guar gum because there were some early indications that these water-soluble fibers would slow down the absorption of glucose when a person ate. See, think of a gum. The gum in your gut is going to slow down the absorption of other nutrients. So it slowed down the absorption of glucose. It also slowed down the absorption of precursors to cholesterol. So the implication was it would reduce sugar in diabetics and that it would reduce cholesterol levels in humans. So all different sorts of water-soluble fiber, and we in our genius decided we were going to study guar gum. It was a water-soluble fiber the first year we gave to laboratory rats. The second year we gave to ourselves. So in part 2, I'll continue on with that story.